Chapter 3. Curious George. One blazing Sunday in July 1941, my mother and I and an older woman named Bessie, who was our housekeeper, went to Mass at Corpus Christi Church on 121st Street between Broadway and Amsterdam. Usually we went to Our Lady of Lourdes, a gloomy neo-Gothic barn on 143rd Street. But the good Catholic ladies had been attracted to Corpus Christi by its pastor, Father George Ford. It wasn't a physical attraction, although Father Ford was, by contemporary Catholic standards, doing something quite indecent. He was delivering intelligent sermons that credited his congregation with having minds of their own. As well as the church, he ran an eponymous parochial school of 8 grades, an oasis of enlightenment in the wasteland of ascensions, nativities, blessed sacraments, and Our Ladies of unbearable maternal grief, where retrograde clergy routinely hammered on the bodies and minds of the children entrusted to their care. After Mass, we strolled up the hill toward Amsterdam. There, outside 519 West 121st Street, was a sign. Vacancy, 5 rooms. Just what we needed. An address my father didn't know about. And only a few doors from a school I could walk to without crossing the street. Of course, I was only 4, so I still had 2 years to shop for a really cool pencil box. Mary always was a visionary. We soon discovered we'd moved into one of the greatest neighborhood concentrations of educational, cultural, and religious institutions in America. The centerpiece was Columbia University with its many colleges, including just a few yards from my front door, Teachers College, from which it was once said every superintendent of schools in America had been graduated. Across Broadway was Barnard, one of the Ivy League's 7 sisters. Down the street from our house was Union Theological Seminary, America's foremost training ground for Protestant clergy. 2 blocks farther west, towering over the neighborhood, was Riverside Church, a 28-story Gothic cathedral endowed by the Rockefellers and known locally as Rockefeller Church, a sure sign of what Americans really worship. It soared over our heads at the foot of our street, a 300-foot phallus with 74 bells in its head, the largest carillon in the world. Just around the corner were the Jewish Theological Seminary and Juilliard School of Music, where I walked in at the age of 10 to ask if I could get piano lessons. Close by was International House, not of pancakes, but of foreign Columbia students. Interchurch Center, headquarters of the National Council of Churches, and a few blocks away Grant's Tomb, where many a night we smoked pot while that old juicer Ulysses and his wife dozed away inside. Our neighborhood quickly became a metaphor for my mother's cultural dilemma. The clash between her self-image as a lace-curtain businesswoman and the reduced circumstances in which her shanty Irish husband had abandoned her. Downtown, up on the hill, was the intellectual center which embodied her cultural aspirations. Uptown, down the hill on Broadway, which Jesus tells us leads to destruction, lay a mostly Irish neighborhood beginning around 123rd Street, known back then as White Harlem. White Harlem was tougher and more crowded than the streets around Columbia. Its buildings were older and many didn't have elevators. The whole area had a decidedly working-class flavor and, of course, was a lot more fun. You can guess in which direction Mary wanted her sons to head and which direction they wanted to head. At the beginning, she didn't have to worry about me. I was only 4 when we moved into 519. The big old Philco radio in the living room fascinated me from the beginning. I couldn't get enough of it. I didn't care what was on. Quiz shows, soap operas, newscasts, interviews, plays, comedies. That all these voices could magically enter my house fired my imagination and nurtured my obsession with words, inflections, accents. For an embryonic loner, the radio was deeply associated with warm feelings, comfort, security, companionship. More than half a century later, it still is. Safe, cared for, nurtured, and mere minutes away from the wild, noisy, vast, and exciting world of New York City, Bessie and I traveled at least 3 days a week to Midtown, where we haunted the racks and counters of cathedrals of consumerism like Macy's, Gimbel's, and Klein's. Noontime, we'd go to Mass at the Franciscan Church on 32nd Street. Then we'd attend the most sacred ritual of all, lunch at the Automat. Squirming around for long hours on hard wooden benches in the church basement couldn't hold a candle to the celestial joys of mashed potatoes, peas, and creamed spinach. And these hundreds of pilgrimages to the world's busiest urban center gave me something more, a sense of vast possibility. You could get on a train and in a matter of minutes entirely change who and what you were. A subconscious lesson at the time, but one I'd put to good use before long. I mastered the Broadway 7th Avenue IRT at a very early age. When I was 6, Bessie left us to work for a Japanese family. An interesting move in 1944. How could she do this to me, Mary wailed. Leave me for a Jap family. I didn't care. I was in Corpus Christi by now, and my Bessie period was behind me. After school without Bessie or Mary or even Patrick was an unparalleled education in street life. I started exploring early. I had a mile-square playground of colleges and churches and their grounds at my disposal. 1,000 hallways, classrooms, labs, theaters, lounges, libraries, dorms, gyms, chapels, and lobbies, just asking to be terrorized by me and my playmates. Security, a more recent American obsession, was minimal, and a handful of small kids can scoot, scatter, disappear, and reappear with amazing ease. In addition, of course, we were in our pre-Vandal stage and attracted little attention. When we got tired of being little pests, there were games: Chinese and American handball, boxball, ring-a-levio, called ring-a-lirio in my neighborhood, blacksmith, Johnny Ride a Pony, kick the can, roller hockey, and a strange game called 3 Steps to Germany. Plus all the city-street variations of baseball, stickball, punchball, stoop ball, curb ball, and baseball off the wall. We had 3 parks nearby: Morningside Park, Central Park, and Riverside Park, which stretched 5 miles along the sewage-laden Hudson, where we bathed in summer with no apparent ill effects. All the parks were dotted with playgrounds, many recently installed by Mayor LaGuardia and called tot lots. Basketball courts, baseball diamonds, wading pools, thousands of trees to climb, countless hills for sliding, sledding, rolling down and running up, and miles of paths for riding bikes. Not designated bike paths, not shared paths, paths where pedestrians had to get the fuck out of the way. Actually, I rarely rode my bike in the park. It was more stimulating when ridden in the streets, weaving adroitly through fast-moving vehicles. Go play in traffic wouldn't have been a put-down for us, just another glaringly obvious suggestion from an adult. By the time I was 7, I was slipping into the subway to head downtown to Central Park, Times Square, Rockefeller Center, Wall Street, Chinatown, the waterfront, great tracts of unexplored territory, an urban El Dorado just sitting there waiting for an adventurous child. Afternoons of collecting autographs, sneaking into movies, browsing in department stores, walking up the stairs to the observation decks of the RCA and Empire State Buildings, stealing stuff from novelty stores, climbing trees in Central Park, riding elevators on Wall Street, or simply walking around, taking in the big show, the greatest entertainment on earth. It gave me the feeling I belonged. I was entirely at home in the vast city I was growing up in. New York City was a great education, but first grade with Sister Richardine, in room 202 also meant other awesome new experiences. Sex, music, and the roar of the crowd. First grade generated first kisses. 2 of them. The first kiss was one afternoon when Sister Richardine announced the imminence of the annual church bazaar. This so aroused a little girl named Julie, clearly a future shopaholic, that she threw her arms around me and planted a big wet kiss on my cheek. An uproar ensued in the class. Small as I already was, I shrank even further. A tiny beet-red creature in short pants. But deep down under those ill-fitting shorts, something was stirring. My second first kiss came not long after, alone in the clayroom with Ilda Mullertime. I bided my time, then made my move, and gave her a big wet kiss. My only memory was that it was good, she didn't hit me, and we didn't get caught. To this day, I can't see a child's poorly made clay bunny without a vague churning in my loins. Room 202 possessed an odd, homemade musical instrument consisting of rows of glass bottles filled with varying amounts of water, suspended in a wooden rack. The player struck the bottles with soft wooden mallets, producing a musical note, and after much effort, I learned Frere Jacques, and one day played it for the class, my first ever public appearance. A real charge, having 30 people, 6-year-olds, but they had pulses, sit without fidgeting and watch something you were doing, which they couldn't do, was intensely satisfying. Having them applaud at the end, even though many had difficulty bringing their hands together with any accuracy, produced an odd sense of power. It was an intoxicant. As would be the case with many intoxicants, I immediately wanted more. Second grade brought my next big career move. Our teacher, Sister Nathaniel, had organized the class into a band, a big band, though not quite in the Duke Ellington sense. The 30-odd children had a single form of instrumentation, sticks and clappers. The band was in effect a large percussion section with one actual instrument, a really crappy xylophone. Still, it was the only thing that could play a melody, and I leaped at it. After incredible effort, I mastered March of the Little Lead Soldiers and became the featured soloist. The highlight of our band schedule was an invitation to perform at the Horace Mann School and Teachers College across 121st Street. The occasion was a tribute to Joe Louis and the First Lady of the United States, Eleanor Roosevelt. At 7 years of age, I was about to do my first liberal benefit. 2 ensemble stick and clapper numbers brought the audience to the REM portion of the sleep cycle, and my big solo. I stepped out in front of the band for March of the Little Lead Soldiers, and without false modesty, I have to say I nailed it to the wall. A great rendition. Tasteful, restrained, and yet spirited. I may have made xylophone history with my daring crosshand 4-mallet ending. I glanced across the stage to where the guests of honor were seated. Thank God they were awake. And applauding. I did notice that one of the First Lady's stockings were drooping rather badly. At that stage of her life, it was probably just part of a larger pattern. Corpus Christi School, revolutionary for its time, had no report cards or grades. There was none of that cutthroat competitive spirit which so improves our American way of life. We were encouraged to study and excel simply for the joy of discovery. If we were inculcated with anything, it was the simple idea that the future would take care of itself if you did right by yourself today. I grasped the work easily and had a lot of time for daydreaming. If there'd been a course in what's outside the school window, I would have been head of the class. But idle classroom time can lead to more than just looking for brassieres on the rooftop laundry line next door. It is the breeding ground of the class clown. Class clowns are dedicated to attracting attention to themselves. Traditional Freudians might attribute my chronic need for attention to the fact that I had no father and half a mother. Nah, the truth was much simpler. Then as now, I was a consummate show-off. Disgusting tricks are the key components in the class clown's repertoire. These are useful not only in subverting the whole process of elementary education, but in making girls sick. That's really all you wanted to do when you were 9 or 10. If you could get Margaret Mary to throw up on her desk in the morning, you knew it was going to be a good day. And though I doubt I deprived my schoolmates of much of their education, I certainly curtailed my own. My entire public school education ended at the 9th grade, and I barely made it through that. On the other hand, the credentials I earned disrupting class and making girls throw up stood me in good stead a quarter-century later in my 1972 album Class Clown. I had several disgusting tricks I could do. I could bend either thumb backward till it lay flat on my lower forearm. I could crack every one of the 28 finger knuckles officially recognized by the Knuckle Institute. I could also control each eye independently. First, both eyes left, then keeping right eye left, move left eye right, then right eye right, done at high speed with the right girl. This will definitely make her vomit. But I was outclassed in this category. Ernest Cruz could turn his upper eyelids inside out. Wow, even I would heave. Don't do that, Ernest. You look like a devil, man. My class clown arsenal included all the standard weapons. Weird faces, fart sounds, belching, mimicry, random Weisenheimery, and sickening physical contortions. I was gifted with a rubbery face and took pride in contorting it in the most revolting ways. The trick here is to identify students with minimal self-control and loud or goofy laughs. This goes to the heart of being class clown, because class is one of those places you're not supposed to laugh, like kneeling in front of the casket. So it's the one place the urge to laugh is uncontrollable. First, you get your target's attention with a rubber band-powered paperclip to the neck. When you have their attention, you whip some interestingly twisted face on them. They explode in giggles. You relax your face into a mask of innocence, and they get reamed out. You're off the hook. You're ready to strike again. This time, instead of depriving only one child of his or her education, you can stunt the development of the entire class. Welcome to the world of revolting sounds, a symphony of bodily functions, preeminent of which is the fart. Class clown was always the first to discover the artificial fart under the arm. You place your palm vertically in your armpit, under the t-shirt and against the skin, and snap your elbow sharply downwards against your side. The air escaping from the armpit pocket erupts in an impressive blat. I've never understood why this action, which involves no actual bodily fluid, results in such a deliciously liquid-sounding fart. Besides a budding talent for which you might loosely call physical comedy, I was also a pretty good mimic. I could do anonymous character voices, like drawls and brogues, but I could also do many of the adults us kids had to deal with, especially the nuns and priests of Corpus Christi. Later I branched out to include storekeepers, local characters, the parents of my friends, a minefield, that one, and the friends of my parent. I also did the standard celebrity repertoire of the time, Peter Lorre, James Cagney, Sidney Greenstreet. Even though my voice was an octave too high for accuracy, they were a generous audience on the stoop. But the exciting thing was the discovery that I could create funny dialogue for these characters and voices. Plenty of people can do imitations. Lots of kids can mimic grown-ups. The real power is in making up stuff for your impressions to say. And the most exciting thing of all was to try this stuff on my mother and have it work. I knew her laugh, and I knew when it was sincere. It felt great to be able to say in answer to her question, "Where did you hear that?" I made it up. Disrupting class made school more bearable once lessons had been mastered, but after school, that longed-for part of the day that belongs to the kid alone was what counted for me and the kids of my generation. Small screens hadn't yet co-opted the play of children, and it was out on the streets with us, exploring neighborhoods, hopping the subway downtown, hanging out, stealing. I remember so much from those days, like my fedora. It was black, and this is how I got it. You would go into the IRT subway at 116th Street, and in the nice weather, when the trains came in, some of the windows would be open. This was way before air conditioning, and the vertically oriented windows would open from the top down. So if a guy was sitting inside with a hat on, you would wait until the doors closed, and then just as the train had begun to lurch forward, you'd reach through the window and grab his hat. Then you'd trot alongside and wave and give him the finger. If you got lucky, you got one that fit. I got a fedora of the low-rent variety where it's almost as flat as a pork pie. But it was a fedora, it was black, and it fit. Now we'd be called delinquent, troubled, alienated, or worse. Certainly some of the guys from the neighborhood later did time, but there was something innocent about running wild on the streets back then. For one thing, the streets were pretty safe. There were no weapons and no one ever got hurt. I stayed a night recently in New York and I didn't know it had snowed, so when I opened the drapes, I was immediately back in that wonderful childhood world of waking up with snow. All those little things you noticed as a kid, the way the mortar that sticks out between the bricks picks up a little snow on each level, those weird porcelain insulators screwed into the window frame that the people before you left behind. They have little piles of snow on them. The clotheslines strung between the buildings on every floor have a fine line of snow all the way across, and suddenly, for no reason, a little bit falls off. There's one other thing with snow. Even when you're 15 or 16 and you just want to get laid, and snowballs no longer hold the slightest interest for you, or even, for that matter, if you're never going to see 60 again. When it snows, you've always got to make one snowball. Only one, but you gotta. Just to see if it's good packing.